All right, thanks everyone. I'm going to be sharing next about my New England trips, something I've been doing for years. Um, One of my signature trips, classic American trips, I call it. Let me pull up some pictures while I talk so we have something interesting to look at. Let me see if I can screen share down at the bottom and find that other. Let's see if I can find it. Oops. Otherwise, I'll just start talking. Um, I always forget where it is at the bottom here. If I could just view this a little different. Here we go. All right, let me find the New England pictures. And all right, let me. All right, I don't know if you can see those New England pictures, but I think I'll try to skip that. We'll just go on and chat about it. Um, and if you guys want to be off camera, that's up to you while I talk about New England. So, the New England trip is something, again, I grew up in the Midwest. For those of you that don't know me, I grew up in Iowa where we had definite seasons. And as a child, every fall, my family would do a fall foliage trip. Generally, it was in the Midwest, something close by. But my parents, when I got old, I was old enough for them to leave me alone at the house for a week. They would head off to New England, and they loved staying in bed and breakfast. As I mentioned, my dad was a incredible planner. We loved getting maps. This was kind of pre-Instagram, pre all of these tools we have now to find things and find places. So we would get the maps out, we would plan, and part of the planning is just part of the joy for me. So I fell in love with helping my parents plan these trips, our summer trips, and then the fall trips that I'd hear about until my first trip. And my first trip was with my parents to go to New England. And they took me to all of their favorite places, their bed and breakfast, the favorite restaurants that were locally owned and run, the spots where Robert Frost wrote his poetry. Some of the presidents, like Calvin Coolidge, was born in Vermont. His whole town, in fact, where he was born, you can still see the birthplace room. You can still see where he was sworn into office at midnight by his father, and all of these amazing places that we read about in American history as well. So after that first experience as a photographer, again, this was pre-digital, I just fell in love with New England. I took my pictures back to California. I showed a lot of them locally. I won a lot of competitions actually, and other photographers got curious. They were like, where did you get these amazing photos? Is the grass really that green? Are those trees really that red? And if people were born and raised in Los Angeles or Texas or some other place, they might not they weren't, they were just incredulous, like, wow, is that really that colorful? And I was like, yes. So honestly, my first tour started as photography tours, taking photographers mainly from California back to New England to capture these postcard scenics, as I called them. Hence why my first website was Fall Photo Trips and Your Photo Travel Guide. Kind of that whole idea, like a good fishing guide. I'm going to take you to the best places to find these amazing scenics to sell. I had several photographers sell their work, sell it to galleries, do all kinds of things like that, make a lot more money on those photos than honestly I ever have. For me, it's been the joy of sharing those experiences and seeing people light up when they were like, oh my gosh, this is like a movie set. I mean, this is like, if you've seen some of the movies, you just almost don't believe that the little barn exists there with the trees in the background and the cows on the hillside and the little road winding through it. But it's really like that. Um, I have several great stories of driving through New England with Californians, I'm just going to say it, and somebody saying, wait, there was just a church and a post office. That was the town? Because they'd see the towns come up on the road sign and it'd say Chester, 10 miles, and St. Johnsbury or whatever town, Woodstock. And Woodstock is in several states, by the way. In fact, funny story about my dad was one of the trips that I took him and replanned it because there is so much to see in New England. You're not going to see it in one trip. I said, I want to go to Woodstock. I know there's some great places to photograph around there. And he's like, Woodstock, you're not taking me to that concert place where the crazy 60s thing happened. I'm like, no, Dad, it's not the same Woodstock. This is Woodstock, Vermont. So once he went and saw Woodstock, Vermont, saw all the amazing places we went to photograph and the cheese and all the things we tasted, the maple syrup, he was like, oh, okay, now I get it. But it's like that all over New England. And for someone trying to plan it, there's almost an overwhelm now of information. I can clearly, I don't know, proudly say I probably am looking at a bookcase with at least one whole bookcase dedicated to books I've owned on New England travel, itinerary, history, all of that. And so from all of that, I've kind of developed this classic New England fall foliage tour to take in what I consider kind of, again, that best experience for first timers, a lighthouse, a lobster dinner, a boat tour, covered bridges, sampling maple syrup at my favorite places, tasting the cheeses that are still made in Vermont, and some of the best roads that have so many scenics right outside the car window. So you don't have to walk miles and miles. If you're a photographer that just has a cell phone, you're going to get amazing pictures as long as the weather and the trees and the sky all cooperate for us, fingers crossed. And that's kind of the basis of this trip. So for this trip, I start and end in Manchester, New Hampshire. I like that smaller airport. If you want to fly into Boston, the pricing is probably better, and you can easily add on Boston yourself ahead of the trip or at the end of the trip. And then there's a bus that I believe was still running from the Boston airport to Manchester, New Hampshire. We can double check that, or you can look into that as well. I can give some suggestions. Flights, again, aren't included just because I'm not a travel agent and everybody's got different points and miles or favorite airlines they like to fly. I've had people even fly into other airports in the New England area and then get themselves to Manchester to meet up. I keep the group small. I think the largest group I had was about 10 people, but again, it's so we can travel together in one vehicle. When you're trying to go to some of these places, it's best to have one vehicle because there's not a lot of places to park, off these little 2-lane roads, sometimes barely 1.5-lane roads that are gravel. Last year, some of my favorite scenics were closed by the locals. These are private properties, and unfortunately, Instagram has ruined it for some of these places. And so some of those classic photos that you've seen of Jenny Farm and of Cloudland Farm, as it was nicknamed, those roads were closed last year. We'll have to see about this year. But I also have contacts and people that I personally know that live in Vermont. So there I can't promise, be a way that I might be able to get us to some places that others can't get to. Sometimes it's a permit, sometimes it's, again, just knowing a local that lives in the area that's going to give you permission to go to that property. So those are two things that have definitely changed just in the last couple of years. We'll see what this year brings. But again, the trip is just all of those things. We start with the Maine coast. The southern Maine coast has a beautiful lighthouse, one of my favorites. It's called Nubble Light. And it's great at sunrise, it's great at sunset. It sits on a little island. I think it actually is an image that they sent out in space, so that they're sending it out. If there's life out there, that's one of the images they're sending out there. There's a great place to eat lobster there. Blueberry pie is big for things to eat in the fall in Maine. So if you like to sample foods like I do, we will make sure we have time for that. We head into the White Mountains of New Hampshire, again, classic territory for forests, fall leaves, the Kank, Route 112, which is one of the top scenic drives, I would say, in the United States. It appears in many books. It literally follows a river, so there's plenty of places to get out of the car, and the scenics are right there, like the waterfalls and the trees and all of that. Part of it will be timing. As we know, we can't promise fall color, but the dates of this trip are October 6th through 12th, which historically for me have been the best dates to obtain the most options for color. And the other thing is, I know locals and other photographers that live out there that are out there all the time. So on a given the night before, sometimes you're asking me like, well, what are we doing tomorrow? And I have like the highlights, the things I'm for sure going to try to include. And then it's also like, well, you know what? I might alter our road to get there because, you know, somebody told me they saw better trees by going 15 miles north versus, you know, 15 miles south or east or west. I mean, and that's again the beauty of the cell phones now and the instantaneous nature of photos. We can share them with each other. But this trip, I really do try to stick to making sure I include a lot of these classic things that you want to see. The longest covered bridge between New Hampshire and Vermont. Like I said, places that are favorites to me to sample the cheeses where the family members are still waxing the cheese and wrapping it and putting it away. Maple syrup, the red farmhouses, places where Robert Frost lived, wrote his poetry. I mentioned Calvin Coolidge. He was born in Vermont. That little town is a gem place to go. You still have the buildings. It still has an active post office stop there. But again, you just feel like you're walked into history. It's stunning and it's just amazing and beautiful. Let me think what else I didn't cover. So you get the Green Mountains, the White Mountains, covered bridges, like pretty much all of your classic things when you think of New England are put into this trip in a way that we're not spending hours and hours in the car. Yes, Kathy.
Yeah, I would just add a couple things. When I went with April, there were only 5 of us. And April and I and maybe one other person were avid photographers. So we got up before dark, before light in the morning, and drove someplace where April knew that the sunrise was going to be good. The rest of the people on the trip, they slept in. And then we drove back to the bed and breakfast where we were staying, and we all had breakfast together and then headed out for the day. And that was just wonderful. I really enjoyed doing it that way.
Oh, thanks, Kathy. Thanks for mentioning that. You're right. That's important to note. So you don't have to be a dedicated, like, get up at dawn photographer, but you are going to get some. If you do get up at sunrise, you will get some amazing things, even with a cell phone camera. And on other trips that I've done, as Kathy kind of mentioned, sometimes by the end of the week, a couple of the other people that were sleeping in, they start to see what we went out and saw in the morning, and then they're like, oh wait, make sure to wake me up. I kind of want to go too and see it. So yeah, there is that option. Thanks for pointing that out, Kathy. And we've got 10 minutes, so I should stop yammering and let people ask questions.
The other thing is, that April's very flexible, so like when we were in Woodstock, there were a couple of people who wanted to go shopping and the rest of us wanted to go take pictures. So she dropped off the people who wanted to go shopping in town, and the rest of us went and got pictures and then, texted them and said, let us know when you're ready to be picked up. And that worked out well too. So, I think that ability to be flexible like that with a small group is one of the big pluses.
Thanks, Kathy. That is true. It is something I do try to do on this trip so that because a lot of quote photography focused trips, I'm just, they've got the tripods and they kind of all go out there together. But then for a spouse or a friend or someone that's not quite as much into it, they might feel like, oh my gosh, we're staying here for, oh, forever. It's going to feel like forever to them while we're just looking at the same thing. So even some of these locations we stop at, whether it's like the Calvin Coolidge town or Kathy already mentioned Woodstock, there is flexibility. We don't all have to. I have some leeway to like leave some people that, hey, we want to go sample beer and we'll come back in an hour and pick you up. Or, some people just want a little extra time on their own. So even though we do move rooms, I know with Kathy, I think we stayed in a different place almost every night. This year, I might try to shift it a little and have 2 nights in more than one place to, again, allow for a little bit more time in that area. But there is room for flexibility because we're not driving huge distances each day. Honestly, in New England, there's so much in such a small area. But it does get dark about 6 o'clock. So we are turning ourselves in kind of early for a lot of us. It's dark, but you're not going to be able to see fall colors after 6 o'clock. So questions, guys?
That's when you go to dinner.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And it's Mary. This trip sounds amazing. And I was going to ask about housing. So it sounds like you said this time you might stay a couple of nights in some of the places.
Right. We stay in small bed and breakfast, local inns. A couple of my destinations that we were staying at, unfortunately, have sold and gone back into private hands. But that's why I was thinking, if I find a couple locations that work really well, we try to stay 2 nights there just to cut down again a little bit on that repacking part of it. Kind of lets you be in a spot a little longer. And like I said, it's nice for, I've had a couple people in the past join, and like Kathy said, some people are okay with getting up at sunrise, and other people, they're like, hey, this is my 1 week off from work. I'm going to sleep in this cozy bed and breakfast and enjoy my coffee and sit on the porch and watch the leaves fall right here. I try to pick really destinations and bed and breakfast that kind of embrace the whole feel of New England. If you're planning your own trip, I'm more than happy to work with someone that wants to do it on their own and suggest corporates. But corporates are going to, again, you're going to get that same experience. Whereas if you're staying with a local, she's collecting the eggs from the chicken on her back porch that morning and making you breakfast and maybe putting something special out for later in the day. And it just really, it's the feeling you get, and it kind of enhances your creativity and enjoyment, I think, of the whole New England experience, as I call it.
That sounds great. And April, what's the best way to see the prices and then to also sign up?
Yeah, I can email you. So shoot me an email. My email is april@aprilart.com. And I have my website, which is fallphototrips.com, and also now selfdrivenewengland.com. And there's a contact form on both of those, and some of my photos that I've taken in the past.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Other questions? Oops, unmute yourself. I see Eric trying to.
Okay, yeah, you did. So I have a question about dinners.
Yes.
So if you're in a sort of a room, I don't know if any of these B&B